Putin kills whoever he wants, be it an opposition leader or anyone else who seems at the target exactly to him.
Seizing on a wave of international outrage one day after the death of Alexei Navalny, Volodymyr Zelensky tries to shore up more Western aid for his war effort. We'll tell you how he's making his case. Welcome to Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Also ahead, pushing back on an order to pay up, Donald Trump labels his $350 million legal defeat a political witch hunt. But will any of it make any difference to American voters? Plus,
we want athletes who have the potential to break world records and give them the opportunity to push the limits of humanity.
And they don't care if performance-enhancing drugs are used along the way. It's the proposed sporting event where doping isn't banned, it's encouraged. Some call it preposterous. Others say they're in it for the science. Outmanned and outgunned, Ukrainian forces retreated today from the eastern city of Avdiivka before Russia's military completely surrounded them. It's the most significant advance by Russian forces since last spring and comes one day after the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. At the Munich Security Conference, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is using the moment of heightened Western anger against Vladimir Putin to call for more support. Michelle Song reports.
The only sound, the click of camera shutters as G7 foreign ministers standing around a table in Munich pay tribute to Alexei Navalny with a moment of silence. World leaders and foreign ministers at the security conference blame one man for Navalny's sudden death, Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is a reminder to everyone who we are dealing with in the Kremlin, says Poland's foreign minister. Analysts say this is how the Putin regime deals with its opponents. Andrew Latham is a political science professor at Macalester College in Minnesota.
As you know, Vladimir Putin's enemies and adversaries have a way of falling out of windows or succumbing to radioactive poisoning.
Another key Putin opponent was also honored in Munich.
Keeping Ukraine in the artificial deficit of weapons allows Putin to adapt to the current intensity of the war.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made his case to his allies, asking for military aid once again, as his country's military struggles with a shortage of weapons, forcing it to withdraw from the strategically important city of Avdiivka today. An aid package worth $60 billion passed the U.S. Senate, but Republicans are holding up the bill in the House of Representatives. After a bilateral meeting today, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris reaffirmed the Biden administration's support for Ukraine.
President Zelensky, as President Joe Biden and I have made clear, we will be with you for as long as it takes.
The U.S. is also preparing to send weapons into Israel, even as President Joe Biden called for a temporary ceasefire today. Israel says it's planning to send ground troops into Rafah, a city now sheltering more than half of Gaza's population. And Arab states at the forum are pushing for the fighting to end. Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdelrahman Al Thani is a key mediator between Israel and Hamas.
The pattern in the last few days are not really very promising, but as I always repeat, we will always remain optimistic, we will always remain pushing.
The wars in the Middle East and Ukraine will still be up for discussion tomorrow, as the Munich Security Conference is set to end. Michelle Song, CBC News, Toronto.
Now to the U.S., where Donald Trump is staring down several court cases that could have a major impact on his re-election campaign. But after getting slammed by a New York judge yesterday who fined him more than $350 million in penalties, Trump remains undeterred. Steve Futterman reports.
Donald Trump as defiant as ever.
These are radical left Democrats. They're lunatics, and it's election interfering. So I just want to thank you for being here.
Hours after the judgment was announced, he was on the attack. And today he showed up at a sneakers convention in Philadelphia. His devoted followers still 100% behind him.
Yes, we need him. He's a Christian. He's a good, honest man. They're after him for no reason. Go out and vote for Trump. Vote Trump.
In his blistering 92-page ruling on Friday, the judge did not hold back. He referred to Trump's claim that he knows more about real estate than anyone else. He then accused Trump of knowingly falsifying business records. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who led the prosecution, sounded almost contemptuous.
Donald Trump may have authored the art of the deal, but he perfected the art of the steal. This long-running fraud was egregious, illegal.
She said Trump's intentional fraud that went on for years allowed him to get special treatment.
Everyday Americans cannot lie to a bank about how much money they have in order to get a mortgage to buy a home.
Cheryl Bader is with Fordham University School of Law.
The decision, it was detailed, it was methodical, and quite scathing. It showed that Trump was a fraud and a cheat. But of course, Trump's favorite defense is always that this is a political witch hunt.
There are questions, of course, about how Trump will pay the penalty. His former attorney, Michael Cohen, says he may not be able to.
He doesn't have $400 million of cash on hand. He has a very interesting way of looking at money. And the way he looks at it is, if his name is somehow attached to that,
It's available.
It's available to him. It is not.
Right.
And he doesn't have it. They're going to have to start liquidating assets.
For those who are diehard Trump supporters, it will likely make no difference. But for those in the middle who might or might not vote for him, it could be significant. Trump now faces 4 criminal trials. The first is set to begin next month. That involves alleged hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 campaign. Steve Futterman for CBC News, Los Angeles.
Supporters of the Ottawa truck convoy are back in the nation's capital 2 years after police broke up the protests that ground the city to a halt. But as Joseph Tunney explains, today's rally was a much calmer event.
Cars honked, chants echoed as the crowd waved Canadian flags and signs calling for the Prime Minister's resignation and various other slogans, and listened to speeches delivered over loudspeakers. Trucks did not block the streets this time around. Organizers say they've been in contact with police and were planning a safe and lawful event. Chris Dacey says people were encouraged to come out due to a recent federal court ruling that found the Liberal government's use of the Emergencies Act during the winter protests of 2022 was unreasonable and infringed on their charter rights.
You know, sometimes people are a little nervous about police, about various other counter-protesters, but I think with that decision, you can tell the atmosphere here is jubilant and people are celebrating.
The federal government is appealing the ruling. For now, the organizers say their message is about coming together with a light, jubilant feeling here on the Hill. Joseph Tunney, CBC News, Ottawa.
That's the voice of Rocio San Miguel, a prominent Venezuelan security expert and human rights advocate. She was detained earlier this month and is being held in prison. Her arrest has set off a row between President Nicolas Maduro's government and the United Nations. For more, I spoke to freelance reporter Manuel Rueda. Manuel, can you tell us more about Rocio San Miguel and what she is accused of?
Yeah, so Rocio San Miguel is a prominent human rights activist and expert on military affairs. She runs an NGO called Control Ciudadano, or Citizens Control, that has produced reports on police and military violence and also monitors the expenditures of Venezuelan armed forces. So the government is now accusing her of being part of a plot to overthrow Maduro, which was supposed to have taken place in January, but they haven't really provided any evidence to back up that claim. In Venezuela, what happens frequently is that government officials make accusations about their critics, and then the justice system, which is far from independent, acts on those accusations.
And Maduro's government is also accusing a UN human rights agency of collaborating with what they call coup plotters and terrorists, and ordering that UN Human Rights Agency staff to leave the country. Is there a connection here? What is that connection?
So that agency is the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. This week they published a message on X where they called for the immediate release of San Miguel. The government here is accusing the UN agency of sort of siding with its critics. and that's why they're ordering them to leave the country, which now means that there's less oversight of human rights conditions in Venezuela, right? And in Venezuela, there's approximately 200 political prisoners, according to some reports made by local human rights groups.
So last October, Maduro signed a deal with the opposition to hold free and fair elections. Since then, though, his main political rival has been barred from running, and now we're seeing this arrest of San Miguel, this fight with the UN. What do you think is behind this recent crackdown on political dissent?
So I think what Maduro is doing here is to intimidate critics or anyone else who is challenging his rule. You know, as you were saying, Maduro agreed in October to supposedly having free and fair elections. But shortly after that deal was made, the opposition held a primary that was won overwhelmingly by Maria Corina Machado. She's a conservative leader who has always been an outspoken critic of Maduro's government. Maduro at the moment is very unpopular due to the economic crisis that has been going on in Venezuela for the past 10 years. And in a fair election, he would likely lose to Machado. That's why you see that Machado was banned now from running against Maduro. And I think that he's also now trying to intimidate other critics as these elections approach.
Well, speaking of those elections, when do you think they'll happen, and what is the outlook for the next few months?
So I think the government will organize an election, but an election that is tailored to Maduro so that he can win the election, where some smaller parties that are partially controlled by the Venezuelan government will be allowed to run against Maduro. And as for Rocio San Miguel, what we've seen before is that they're sort of used as bargaining chips when the government is trying to get concessions from the international community. So, for example, they might offer to release her as part of some deal with the United States or Europe to lift some sanctions on Venezuelan officials. San Miguel also has citizenship from Spain, so that also means that that country's government might get involved in efforts to secure her release.
Okay, thanks so much, Manuel.
Absolutely.
That was freelance reporter Manuel Rueda. Hundreds of people in Senegal took to the streets of the capital, Dakar, calling for their election not to be postponed. It was set to take place on February 25th, but it was delayed earlier this month after President Macky Sall passed a bill to push it to December. That postponement has shaken one of Africa's most stable democracies, sparking violent protests and fears of authoritarian overreach. This week, the country's constitutional court overturned the declaration. Sall says he will obey the ruling and reschedule the vote as soon as possible. The creators of the Enhanced Games are taking on the Olympics. They promise that at their proposed sporting event, athletes will run farther, jump higher, and swim faster. That's because doping won't just be allowed, it'll be encouraged. Unsurprisingly, that idea has its critics, but as Jamie Strachan tells us, some athletes say they're on board.
I absolutely think that the athletes should be punished for doping.
Canadian figure skater Kirsten Moore-Towers and her teammates played by the rules, only to be knocked off the Olympic podium by a Russian team that was anchored by a skater who was doping.
Why have I worked my whole life, every day, for countless years? Why have I done this my whole life cleanly and correctly, the right way?
Over the course of Olympic and international sport history, countless athletes from Ben Johnson to Lance Armstrong have reached the peak of their sports with the aid of banned performance-enhancing drugs, playing the never-ending game of cat and mouse with the rules. But what if being clean didn't matter? What if doping was actually embraced?
We want athletes who have the potential to break world records and give them the opportunity to push the limits of humanity.
Aaron D'Souza, the founder of the Enhanced Games, describes them as the Olympics of the future.
I am a proud, enhanced athlete.
Athletes under clinical supervision would be allowed to take substances currently banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency. Backed by big money, including PayPal founder Peter Thiel, D'Souza is promising millions of dollars in prize money, including big payouts for world records.
I don't think that athletes want to be the fastest natural man in the world. They just want to be the fastest.
But would any legitimate athlete actually do this?
As far as my athletic peak, history says that it's behind me. The enhanced games say it's not. Let's find out.
32-year-old Australian swimmer James Magnussen, a two-time world title winner and Olympic silver medalist, is the biggest name to express interest.
So I'm going to do this with the best doctors and medical professionals in the world to make sure that I'm doing it safely and properly. And this can be a case study for future athletes. Is there a way to be faster, higher, stronger, safely without it having negative impacts?
Most in the sporting world have ridiculed the idea.
I think it's a horrific message.
Jeremy Luke is the president of the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, the agency responsible for anti-doping in Canada.
There may be challenges or possibilities for improvement to the anti-doping regime. The answer to that is not to throw it away and suggest people compete using drugs.
Catherine Ordway is an expert in anti-doping and sport integrity at the University of Canberra. She calls the idea of the enhanced games preposterous, but hopes it will force the IOC to give athletes a greater financial stake in the Olympics.
And if the enhanced games does nothing else but actually forces the international Olympic movement to properly share the prize money and the broadcast rights and the sponsorship money that it receives, which is in the billions across the athlete population, then I think that's a good thing.
The Enhanced Games says it will feature 5 events, including swimming and track, and promises an inaugural games early next year. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
A Canadian brand known for its stretchy athleisure wear is being accused of stretching the truth about its environmental claims. Activists say Lululemon is greenwashing, and they want regulators to look into what they call deceptive marketing. Senior business reporter Anis Haydari explains.
I see the work they do in the community, but I've never been supportive of the work because it didn't seem like it had a lot of substance behind it.
Danielle Hugenboom isn't a Lululemon fan. She's a yoga instructor based in Vancouver, and in the past, an activist speaking out against the company's environmental practices.
Lululemon, although is based in Vancouver and started there, it really is a global brand. And I think if you're in the world of Vancouver, you forget how large it is and how impactful it is in the world.
Hugenboom says part of why she's not into the popular brand is she feels they don't live up to their environmental promises. For example, not reducing greenhouse gas emissions enough.
They had an opportunity to be probably one of the most environmentally sustainable brands in the entire world because they come from Vancouver, which is one of the greenest places in the world, but they've done the opposite.
She's not the only one saying this about Lululemon. An environmental group she's worked with has filed an official complaint.
Our research and Lululemon's own filings with the carbon...
Stand.Earth wants the Competition Bureau to look into whether the athleisure company is misleading consumers.
That's what the Competition Bureau is set up to crack down on, and we're asking them to do so in this case.
Todd Pollia is executive director of Stand.Earth in Bellingham, Washington.
They are telling customers that buying their products is restorative to the earth. Buying products that are made from fossil fuels in factories powered by fossil fuels, transported with fossil fuels, and then telling people it's good for the earth is just something that we could not let stand. And we're asking Lululemon to either stop saying that or make it true.
Lululemon said in a statement it's committed to decarbonization and that it's reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 60% in facilities it owns and operates itself. But the company has also reported that indirect emissions have gone up, things that happen because of a company's activities. Lululemon's increased between 2020 and 2022.
So deceptive marketing claims are one of the most frequently brought cases by the Bureau.
This claim is a bit different, says Keldon Bester, because it's relatively new to see broad complaints about sustainability claims from a company. He's executive director of the Canadian Anti-Monopoly Project and a former special advisor at the Competition Bureau.
Here, I think we have something that is, in some ways testable. A company is claiming it's going to reduce emissions while emissions continue to increase. So these cases are going to be important tests of the limits of Canada's greenwashing laws.
The Competition Bureau isn't obligated to keep the public updated on investigations like this. It did confirm the complaint to CBC News, saying there is no conclusion of wrongdoing against Lululemon at this time. Anis Haidari, CBC News, Calgary.
Toronto teacher Matthew R. Morris has gone from the front of the classroom to the top of the bestseller list. His memoir, Black Boys Like Me, became an instant hit when it came out last month. In it, Morris documents his life growing up in Scarborough, in Toronto's east, while grappling with questions of race and identity. He also takes on the education system, which, he tells Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, often pigeonholes Black boys like him.
I'm not trying to tell anybody about the answers.
Matthew Morris is not a celebrity, but upon its release last month, his memoir, Black Boys Like Me, found itself on the nonfiction bestseller list in Canada, wedged between autobiographies of stars like Britney Spears, Geddy Lee, and Matthew Perry. Not too bad for a middle school teacher in Toronto.
What do you think it is that really grabbed people about your book?
I'm merely just trying to share a way of just observing what I've experienced in the last 30 years of my life as it pertains to race and racism and belonging. And I think that in 2024, people are open to the conversation around.
Those conversations have become more common in recent years after the police killings of Black men like Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and George Floyd led to mass protests and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. Morris has had his own run-ins with police, being stopped multiple times just for being a young Black man with arm tattoos driving a nice car. He says those unsubtle messages about where Black boys like him belonged and where they didn't is part of what pushed him into teaching.
I wanted to be able to come back to a community where I was born and raised in, and on a one-to-one level, show young Black males that you can exist in a way where you feel comfortable and a way that is still stitched to your community and your aesthetic, but you can also do well in school.
It's that specific lens of education and Morris's experiences as both a student and then a young teacher that form a large part of the book.
You know, I have a lot of friends and even family members that you could say were impeded by education and were impeded by school.
Morris grew up in Scarborough, a son of a white mother and Black father, in a household sometimes short of money, but never in love. In his home, he was just Matthew. And as a child, he didn't think much about the color of his skin. It was in school that he found himself being put into boxes.
I was pushed into athletics simply because I won a race at recess or something like that, when I could have been pushed into science or academics because, to be quite honest, education and schooling at that time wasn't necessarily difficult for me, and I got decent grades, but the emphasis on my identity being related to athletics was more of a validating factor that I think maybe the teachers thought I would feel good about.
Now, those very things that made him a target are the things helping him bond with his former students.
You know, it was very cool to see a teacher with so many tattoos. He had a very nice fashion sense, which I was drawn to, and I was really interested to just learn more about the teacher.
Nathan Barnaby was once a distracted middle schooler. Now 19 years old, he wants to go to college and study carpentry. He attributes those aspirations to that initial connection with the man he calls Mr. Morris.
So he understands the distractions, he understands the things that would hold you back.
So, are things any better for Black boys in the education system now than when Matthew Morris was growing up? Ontario just became the first province to make Black history mandatory in middle and high school starting in September.
It's gotten better. It's better now than it was when I first started teaching over a decade ago. And since then, that has been better than when I was once a student in the same school board that I teach in. So we're making improvements. I think that the idea of starting with conversations is important. I just think that we also need to be cognizant of who we bring to the table when we are having these conversations.
And he's doing his best to continue that conversation with the next generation, educating inspiring teachers at Brock University. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
This is Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can hear Your World Tonight wherever you are. Just subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app or download the CBC Listen app. You'll get the best from CBC Radio, CBC Podcasts, and CBC Music. On the southwestern tip of Newfoundland, a small town is scrambling to save a piece of buried treasure. A shipwreck more than 100 years old was spotted in the chilly North Atlantic waters last month. The community hopes it could bring in tourist dollars if the ocean doesn't break it apart first. Heather Gillis reports.
It was a surprise from the sea when a shipwreck washed ashore in Cape Ray on Newfoundland's southwest coast at the end of January. But storm surge this past weekend has battered the wreck, pushing it further out to sea and 30 feet down the shore.
Thank you, Jerry. Not a problem, buddy.
Diver Sean Bath is heading to Cape Ray from St. John's. He's got a 900-kilometer drive ahead of him. And he's going to be worrying about the wreck the whole time.
Yeah, my biggest concern now is it still going to be there when we get over there, or how much damage is done to it, because it's been tied on 2 different times now, and both times the sea had bust off the parts it was tied to.
Bath says the surf and storm surge is shearing off parts of the ship, whittling down what was first measured to be 125 feet in length.
Second time we measured it, she was 111. This time when we measure it, she's probably going to be down to 95 or something. She's breaking apart, and we're losing a lot of material off that ship all the time.
Not much is known about the wreck. The provincial archaeologist says it's likely from the 1800s. He's analyzing samples and trying to pinpoint where it came from. The archaeologist says it isn't a significant wreck, and there are hundreds of others like it off the coast of Newfoundland. But people in Cape Ray, a town of about 300, don't agree. Ann Osmond is one of them.
Because right now we're thinking that this came ashore for us to tell the story.
Osmond hopes to preserve the wreck and boost tourism in a place battered by post-tropical storm Fiona. The Newfoundland and Labrador Shipwreck Preservation Society would like to see it saved, but its head, Neil Burgess, says that will be difficult and costly.
Preserving a wooden hull of this size to a museum standard would be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. It's really expensive preserving wood that's been in the sea for centuries.
People in the area are also fundraising to save the wreck and conserve it. Some have volunteered up equipment. Trevor Croft says they'll need a crane or a tow truck to get it out of the ocean.
But time is definitely not in our favor. So, hopefully sooner rather than later. And again, funding is a big issue.
The name and origin of the shipwreck is still a mystery, one that people in Cape Ray hope to solve before the wreck slips back out to sea. Heather Gillis, CBC News, St. John's.
Now I gotta cut loose, put loose, kick off Sunday shoes.
40 years ago today, Kevin Bacon kicked and flipped his way into movie history. Or rather, his dance double did, busting a move to bust down the rigid rules of a small Midwestern town. A dance revolution set to Kenny Loggins' infectious tune. On Footloose's 40th anniversary, students at Payson High School in Payson, Utah, where the movie was filmed, are trying to bring home the bacon by asking him to their spring prom. They've been trying to get his attention with videos posted on social media, and they told local news outlet KSL the movie is really important to their school.
I think Payson's the one place that you could ask 100 people and every single one of them has watched Footloose.
Kevin, please come. We've been trying so hard all year.
Where have all the good men gone and where are all the gone?
Bacon has commented on their videos but hasn't committed to a visit. So you might say those students are holding out for a hero. Here's a little of that other Footloose classic. This is Bonnie Tyler on Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thanks for listening.